Today is September 26, 2015, and we are just coming to the end of the Sabbath. So let's pray. Heavenly family, thank you so much for the Sabbath day. Thank you for this time to rest, to enter into the truth, to study it, and to get a grasp of the things of your law. Thank you for showing us the way of salvation. Make it plain to us tonight. Help us to grasp it more clearly than we ever have before. Thank you, Heavenly family. Guide us, sister. Father, Mother, it's in the name of your children, Branch, that we ask these things. Thank you so much. All right. So I hope everyone has had a good Sabbath. And perhaps I just want to ask first if people have had an opportunity to study, and maybe if we wanted to start with people sharing some things that they've come across, perhaps. We're going to be going through Leviticus, starting at chapter 1. But before that, just in case anyone's been studying and you want to mention certain things, then feel free.
Well, either Norman and I would like to share, Norman or I.
Sure.
He's getting some stuff out here.
Okay. I looked at several things lately. One, I went back to the community rule and reread that and found some interesting things. But that might be a little too much to read to you all right now. But also, I went to the Epistle of Barnabas. And very interesting. I've never read it before. But the part where he was talking about how he was comparing people's characteristics to certain unclean animals, like the eagle and the falcon and the crow and the hare and the hyena and the weasel. But then he talked about a clean animal, which I thought was pretty interesting. But if you don't mind, I'll read the one about one of the unclean animals first, so you kind of know what it was about. And this is about the swine. Yes, this is Barnabas 10:13. Accordingly, he mentioned the swine with this intent. Thou shalt not cleave, saith he, to such men who are like unto swine. That is, when they are in luxury, they forget the Lord. But when they are in want, they recognize the Lord. Just as the swine, when it eateth, knoweth not his Lord, but when it is hungry, it crieth out, and when it has received food again, it is silent. I thought that was pretty interesting, because it's how a lot of people actually are. And then, the only clean animal he mentioned was about the ones that divideth the hoof and cheweth the cud. And this is what he said in Barnabas 10:11. Again Moses saith, Ye shall eat everything that divideth the hoof and cheweth the cud. What meaneth he? He that receiveth the food knoweth him that giveth him the food, and being refreshed appeareth to rejoice in him. Well, said he, having regard to the commandment, what then meaneth he? Cleaving to those that fear the Lord, with those who meditate in their heart on the distinction of the word which they have received, with those who tell of the ordinances of the Lord and keep them, with those who know the meditation is a work of gladness, and who chew the cud of the word of the Lord. But why that which divideth the hoof? Because the righteous man both walketh in this world, and at the same time looketh for the holy world to come. You see how wise a lawgiver Moses was? Anyway, I thought that was really interesting about how the righteous man both walketh in this world and at the same time looketh for the holy world to come, dividing the hoof. I never thought of anything like that before. Anyway, that was just something I found there that I found very interesting. Do you have time for me to read something from the community rule?
Yeah, absolutely. This is, I think this is great.
Okay. Well,
is it possible that I can make a comment?
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, it's really strange, but I was led to read that as well. And I also dwelled on that section there where it had the different animals and how it represents different people. And, you know, we know that it's in Acts where it talks about the sheet that came down, and we understand that it wasn't really talking about foods, it was really talking about the people. And so it was really good for me to see that connection from reading this in the Epistle of Barnabas versus over in Acts. And I also found it very interesting how it talks about the eagle, because I know that Lois talks about, you know, the eagle and her eaglets. And an eagle is an unclean bird. And I have to say, I thought, why would God use that particular bird to represent something sacred as well? So I don't have an answer, but it was just a question that came up as I was reading.
It's just weird that you guys are all reading the Epistle of Barnabas, because I was led to read that too. And, I was just researching everything was said about the rabbit or the hare and the hyena. I thought that was really odd. I didn't really understand it either, but I did find on Google someone asking the same question that was reading the Epistle of Barnabas. But as far as the sacrifices go in the Epistle of Barnabas, I did have a question, because it seemed back in Barnabas 7, it was talking about the two goats, I'm assuming for the Day of Atonement, which was yesterday, and it seemed like I had thought, you know, as an evangelical, I'd always assumed that both goats were representing Christ, and then as a Seventh-day Adventist, through Ellen White's writings in The Great Controversy, I was just researching that, where she was kind of implying that the one goat was for, well, the Bible says it's for Azazel, and in the book of Enoch, it kind of explained who Azazel is, and that was Satan, and then that goat, she had in a vision that goat, the scapegoat, struggled, which Christ wouldn't do. But in Barnabas, it seemed like he was equating both goats to Christ. I don't know if anyone caught that or could clear up any confusion I might have on that, because both goats were the same in Barnabas 7:6. Take two goats, fair and alike, and offer them, and let the priest take one for a whole burnt offering for sins, and then the other one was a type of Jesus as well. So I thought that was kind of weird. And the washing of the...
Could I address something before we sort of go past? I know you had the question here in regard to the goats, so could I address the prayer before by Rebecca?
Mm-hmm.
Rebecca?
Yes, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Well, he says, why would they use the eagle, which is an unclean animal, to represent like God? Is that your question?
Sorry, I keep muting and unmuting myself. Yes, because we know that the spirit is talked about as her, you know, the eagle with her eaglets, and we know that represents the daughter. And so I thought it very interesting that God used this particular animal, and I had no idea why.
Well, the eagle is the only animal that pitches at the highest point of any place. It makes its home in the highest places on earth. There is no other bird that has a higher perch. Eagle also has a phenomenal vision so that it could see literally for miles. It could literally be 2 miles up and spot a rodent on the ground. So its high sight is all-seeing as well as where it sits. And so it always talks about him sitting on the loftiest of height, meaning overlooking everything. So in that form, where you see the representation of God, whose throne is above all thrones, is above all other animals, and is all-seeing in the sense that he could, as an eagle would be. So characteristics on those points, and not so much onto the aspect of whether it's a clean or unclean, but its ability is what is comparable above all other animals.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, so was there more that you wanted to say, Mary?
No, that was it. I just had a lot of, questions. It was an interesting book, though, I have to say.
Okay, well then I just want to ask, since evidently people have been reading it, did anyone have anything to say in reply to Mary concerning the two goats?
Well, I too had spent the day today studying on the scapegoat because I know what inspiration tells us, who it represents. However, what I'm also seeing is that it may not necessarily be that. Lois makes a very interesting connection in, I think it's Behold Thy Mother, Part 2, which is something that some of the other commentaries make as well, that I'm thinking that it's possible that it represents the daughter rather than Satan. I always thought it's awful strange that Satan has a part in this whole ceremonial system, and it just didn't quite fit to me. So I'm starting to think that, possibly we haven't understood it correctly.
That's very interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
And I at this point, actually, first I'll ask, does anyone else have any comments on that? How about you guys, Carol and Norman? You guys mentioned that you were looking at the Epistle of Barnabas. Did you have any thoughts on that one way or the other?
Well, I do remember reading that, and that it was curious to me also of why both goats represented Christ. But, I briefly remember what Rebecca's talking about now. I'm going to have to just go back and look at that. So, other than that, no.
Yeah, I didn't really study into that today.
Sure, okay. I just want to ask a question, too, then, so there you have at least 3 possible interpretations that have been mentioned. One being that the one goat represents Christ and the other goat represents Satan. Another being that both goats represent Jesus. And another being that one goat represents Jesus and the other represents the Holy Spirit, or Holy Ghost, whichever term you want to use. So here's what I'll say. By now we are all familiar with the idea of different things having multiple applications. However, we've also learned that there's at least usually an application that is more specifically intended, as in, you can have an application of something, but if it doesn't fit every specification, then it cannot be the perfect fulfillment or the full application. And so ultimately, what we want to learn more than anything is that perfect application. So I want to ask you guys what you think as to how we can go about finding what the fullest sense of the symbol is.
I think we need to ask the daughter because she knows.
That's good, for sure. Yeah, I mean, if she's the one who inspired the scriptures and inspired the ceremonial system and all of that, then, yeah, if we want to know, then we must go to the source behind these things. And by what means do you suppose, or in fact, I'll ask this in a different way, what can be our assurance? What is the thing that will be kind of our standard for being able to know whether we have the fullest application or not? Because, of course, someone could come along and just say, well, the Spirit told me it's this, you know. But how do we know whether that is really what it is versus something else?
Well, I would say by investigating what has been given to us in the Word, the Bible, and other things, and as well as the writings of Sister White and Sister Roden, and just comparing all of those things.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely along the lines.
Understanding the type completely.
Okay, so that's really good, understanding the type completely. Okay, so here's the thing. If you want to know what a certain thing is really saying in its fullness, then the real standard is the thing itself. You know, it's just like the idea that truth stands on its own merits, right? So the way that we will be able to know what the fullest application of a thing is, and when it comes and, when it's revealed and so on and so forth, the reason that we'll be able to know that, oh yes, this is actually the perfect fulfillment is because it meets every specification of the original thing. So if the question concerns Leviticus 16 and the two goats, if that's what the question is concerning, then that passage itself has to be the ultimate standard to know, okay, well, let's see, is this lining up with every aspect? So that brings in the thought that, okay, well, if we're going to need to know according to that passage, then we have to really know what that passage is saying. We might not know every aspect of the meaning of what it says, but we need to know what it says. Like, okay, what is the actual order that it lays out? It talks about Azazel. There's certain questions to ask, like, well, wait, okay, here's a good question. Is the goat that is for Yahweh equated with Yahweh? And is the goat that is for Azazel equated with Azazel? Those are questions that need to be asked. And if the text dictates one way or the other, then that plays a large part in understanding the identity of those different things. So, in other words, you have two possibilities there. Is the goat being sent to Azazel and thereby being distinguished from Azazel, or is the goat supposed to be a representative of Azazel? So you have those different things. And, I'm not going to get all into really more detail than that right now, but I encourage everyone to study that out and to investigate it and come to an understanding of it. Any other thoughts or comments on that issue before moving to the community rule?
No.
I also noticed they're male goats, right? versus female, so that has to be looked into too.
No, that's a really good point. They're both male goats, so that has to be something to be taken into consideration. Another thing, this is just to expand a little bit off of what Rebecca mentioned in the Behold Thy Mother series by Lois, where Lois takes that sacrifice and compares it with at least one other sacrifice where you have more than one animal involved, where one actually is slain, one is killed, but the other lives. So when you see something like that, it's an unusual thing to have a sacrifice that isn't killed, but it's still a sacrifice. So then you could ask, like, okay, wait, are there any other places where there's a sacrifice that isn't killed? And investigate that further and see if there's any common threads in those circumstances. So I just wanted to mention that as another piece of this picture for people to investigate while looking on that point. And I just want to ask if everyone who read the Epistle of Barnabas, maybe you could just quickly reply to this. Did you guys read the entire thing, or did you just read part of it?
I read the entire thing, and there's a couple other things that are really interesting, but probably not a good idea to bring them up now.
Sure.
Yeah, I read the whole thing too, and yes, there was a lot of interesting things in it.
Okay, sure.
I read through up to like the animal part with the unclean animals, and then I started researching hares and hyenas online.
Sure. And I'll actually make a quick comment on that. From what I understand, it talks about hares, hyenas, weasels, and even, I think it mentions a phoenix in the Epistle of Barnabas. But there's certain things that it says about some of the animals that seem just totally out there. And from what I understand, those were very common thoughts. It's not like a unique thing that Barnabas came up with. From what I understand, that's just part of what most people in the ancient world thought concerning those animals. So that might be an aspect of it to look into. But yeah, Epistle of Barnabas, I do find it really interesting that a number of you guys were looking into that. It's a very, very interesting letter. It can be interpreted in really different ways, in that some people find it to be so anti-Jewish and anti-law, just like how people interpret Paul to be anti-Jewish and anti-law, and then others basically find it to be so incredibly Jewish and pro-law. So, obviously that's exactly the opposite. But those are things to investigate. And then you have these questions. The Epistle of Barnabas, it was included in very important early New Testament manuscripts. Some of the earliest codexes, which is basically a large manuscript with a number of New Testament books bound together, they include the Epistle of Barnabas. For instance, Codex Sinaiticus, that is basically one of the earliest and most important New Testaments. I think it's from the 300s, which would be the 4th century, and it had it included the Epistle of Barnabas as well as the Shepherd of Hermas. And so this goes back into early Christianity. A number of other early believers accepted this book as scripture and so on, and held it to be authoritative. A number of scholars today believe that it was written at about the same time as some of the books that are in the New Testaments that we have. And then others believe that this wasn't really written by Barnabas, but it's a later 2nd century text. And just so you all know as well, most scholars today believe that 6 of the 13 letters in the New Testament that are attributed to Paul are not actually written by Paul. They consider it to be falsely attributed authorship, pseudepigrapha. So that's something, that's something to investigate too. But it's to say that, look, whether people say that something is not authentically authored by a certain person or whether others say that it is, obviously we can't just take anyone's word for it. We need to investigate it for ourselves. And so at some point, maybe even some point really soon, we should come back to the Epistle of Barnabas and really dive into it and ask some of those really foundational and important questions and study it out and see what we find. So anyway, Norman, if you wanted to read something from the community rule, I think that'd be great. And maybe even before doing that, if you could just kind of give everyone a brief synopsis of what the community rule is.
Oh, okay. Okay, the community rule is, well, basically like it says, rules for the Essenes who joined the community to dedicate their lives to God and the community. And when I read this the first time, it was like, man, how could they just follow all these rules and be so devoted to this? So I thought I'd go back and see if I could find out why. And I come across some things that made me realize that this is how we are supposed to be. And anyway, I'd just like to read a few quick paragraphs and just let you kind of think on them. And also a couple of these paragraphs do mention cleansing and anointing and several different things.
Excuse me, Norman, can I ask, where do you get a copy of that?
Well, I bought it at the used bookstore there in Springfield, but that was the only copy there. So.
Who wrote that book? I'm going to look online. I want to see if I can follow it.
Okay. You want us just to send you a link to it and everything?
Oh, sure. That's great. Thanks. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
And I'll just mention for clarity in case anyone is just totally unfamiliar with the community rule. It's so Norman mentioned the Essenes. The Essenes were one of the early groups or schools of philosophical thought in Second Temple Judaism. When we talk about Second Temple Judaism, that's ranging from about 500 BC till the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And so that's, Second Temple Judaism basically started with people like Zerubbabel and Zechariah and Haggai and Ezra and Nehemiah. That's all early Second Temple stuff. And then, of course, Christ himself, he lived in Second Temple times. And in the New Testament, you read a lot about the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Pharisees and Sadducees were two schools of philosophical thought within Judaism. And the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes were the three most prominent schools of thought. And basically, the Sadducees were, a lot of them were rich people, the Sanhedrin was mostly composed of Sadducees. A lot of priests and high priests were Sadducees, not exclusively, but Sadducees were very much kind of upper class ruling. They were very, very strict and rigid when it came to the law, more so than Pharisees. And they, Sadducees didn't believe in angels, didn't believe in resurrection. pretty well just accepted the 5 books of Moses as authoritative. And then the Pharisees, they had a different perspective. They believed in angels. They believed in resurrection, a lot more similar to what the early followers of Christ believed as compared to the Sadducees. Paul, of course, was a Pharisee. And the Pharisees were the most popular school of thought. They were most, well-known and liked among the people, and they established synagogues and synagogues were like just public places of meeting where people would come together in different places to study the Torah and to learn Judaism. Yeah, so those are Sadducees and Pharisees. I just want to give you guys a just quick basic overview. So it kind of, you have some pieces there in your mind. Pharisees were, again, more popular. Pharisees played a large part in synagogal worship. Rabbis, like the rabbinical Judaism, has its roots primarily in Pharisaic Judaism. So rabbis, that's what started after the destruction of the temple. You have basically the birth of rabbinical Judaism, but it was mostly founded in the Pharisaic school of thought. But even Pharisees and Sadducees, there weren't that many Pharisees and that many Sadducees, but they had influence over people. And then the third most well-known or prominent school of thought was the Essenes. And basically, the Essenes primarily lived in the countryside, and they were more separate. They were more strict when it comes to rules of purity and observance of different laws, like Sabbath laws and eating laws and different things like that. They were very, very strict, very, very devoted and studious. And there's a place near the Dead Sea called Qumran. It was kind of a settlement there. And right by Qumran is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And most scholars believe that the Dead Sea Scrolls were the writings produced at Qumran, and that the Qumran settlement was inhabited by Essenes. So Qumran, the thought is that Qumran is where the Essenes had their headquarters, so to speak. And some of the reasons for that is because contemporary historians, even Roman historians, like a guy named Pliny the Elder, he actually described where the Essenes had their headquarters, and he says that it's right there on the Dead Sea, basically exactly where Qumran is. And then the description of the Essenes in the writings of Josephus, who was a first-century Jewish historian, he actually spent time with Essenes, and he describes them. Philo is a Jew from Egypt who lived at the turn of the era, 1st century BC to 1st century AD, and he describes the Essenes as well. And the description of the community at Qumran is found in the Dead Sea Scrolls is very similar to what both Philo and Josephus describe. And those are some of the reasons why most scholars say, hey, yeah, the people who were there at Qumran were Essenes. People with the Dead Sea Scrolls were Essenes. And the reason why it's connected, I mean, if you look at, there's even tests that have been done today where the ink on the Dead Sea Scrolls has been tested, the clay has been tested, ink wells were found at Qumran, and the clay that the scrolls were found in, they were found in clay jars. The clay isn't brought in from somewhere else. It's basically from Qumran, and so that's kind of why that's the general view. So the community rule is basically kind of a description of the rule of life for Essenes. And, do you happen to know about when it was written, Norman? Is it like around 200 BC or like 150?
Yeah, I believe so. I'd have to look back here and remember that. But
yeah, I think it was somewhere like either the mid to late 2nd century BCE.
Here it says the community rule is probably one of the oldest documents of the sect. So the document itself is the oldest. Its composition may have originated around 100 BCE.
Okay. Yeah, so that would be the late, obviously 100 is the beginning of the 1st century BC. So, hopefully I just wanted to give that brief overview of some of those things within Judaism that sets some of the basic framework for the time of Christ and also just the circumstances of the Essenes and the Dead Sea Scrolls and all that.
Right. And also it's interesting how their way of living was similar in some ways to how the apostles lived, like sharing their possessions and all.
For sure.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll just read a few paragraphs that kind of stuck out to me because it just seemed like, this is how the Lord wants us to be, actually. Anyway, the Master shall teach the saints to live according to the book of the community rule, that they may seek God with a whole heart and soul and do what is good and right before him, as he commanded by the hand of Moses and all his servants the prophets, that they may love all that he has chosen and hate all that he has rejected, that they may abstain from all evil and hold fast to all good, that they may practice truth, righteousness, and justice upon the earth, and no longer stubbornly follow a sinful heart and lustful eyes, committing all manner of evil. And this next part, is really why they could do all this, because I'll read the first sentence, because they freely devoted themselves. They were just willing to give up everything for this. It says, all those who freely devote themselves to his truth shall bring all their knowledge, powers, and possessions into the community of God, that they may purify their knowledge in the truth of God's precepts and order their powers according to his ways of perfection and all their possessions according to his righteous counsel. They shall not depart from any command of God concerning their times. They shall be neither early nor late for any of their appointed times. They shall stray neither to the right nor to the left of any of his true precepts. All those who embrace the community rule shall enter into the covenant before God to obey all his commandments, so that they may not abandon him during the dominion of Belial because of fear or terror or affliction. For it is through the spirit of true counsel concerning the ways of man that all his sins shall be expiated, that he may contemplate the light of life. He shall be cleansed from all his sins by the Spirit of holiness, uniting him to his truth, and his iniquity shall be expiated by the Spirit of uprightness and humility. And when his flesh is sprinkled with purifying water and sanctified by cleansing water, it shall be made clean by the humble submission of his soul to all the precepts of God. Let him then order his steps to walk perfectly in all the ways commanded by God concerning the times appointed for him, straying neither to the right nor to the left, and transgressing none of his words. And he shall be accepted by virtue of a pleasing atonement before God, and it shall be to him a covenant of the everlasting community. God will then purify every deed of man with his truth. He will refine for himself the human frame by rooting out all spirit of injustice from the bounds of his flesh. He will cleanse him of all wicked deeds with the spirit of holiness. Like purifying waters, he will shed upon him the spirit of truth to cleanse him of all abomination and injustice. And he shall be plunged into the spirit of purification, that he may instruct the upright in the knowledge of the Most High, and teach the wisdom of the sons of heaven to the perfect of way. For God has chosen them for an everlasting covenant, and all the glory of Adam shall be theirs. There shall be no more lies, and all the works of injustice shall be put to shame. And that's pretty much it. It gives you some idea of they were really devoted to this. And this is just how I think we should be really devoted to what we believe.
Amen. Yeah, it's reading things like that from the community rule. Yeah, you can see such a focus on righteousness and such a focus on purity. And, hearing you read that after reading some of the Thanksgiving hymns and so on, you can see some of that same language there, being purified by the Holy Spirit,
Right.
Different things like that. And, of course, if you read things, the writings of the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's a lot of focus on the Holy Spirit as the purifier, the Holy Spirit guiding and directing and all these things, and then you read about their life like that, how everyone gave everything for the sake of the truth and for God and for the community. And then you compare that with Acts of the Apostles, and you see it's the Holy Spirit guiding and everything. The Holy Spirit is the one who's teaching them and showing them what to do and purifying people. And what do? Everyone gives all for the sake of God and for the sake of each other. It's so similar. It's not only is it so similar, but it's surprisingly similar in that this wasn't something that every group of Jews was doing. Every group of Jews did not have this focus and did not have this developed understanding of the Holy Spirit. Another thing that I'll mention that I believe it's Josephus who points this out, that the Sadducees and the Pharisees and other Jews believed that prophecy had ceased, but the Essenes believed that prophecy was still continuing. If that's true, that is a very significant point, as we have come to learn what the spirit of prophecy is, the need for the perpetual gift among us. And so if it's true that other Jews, such as Sadducees and Pharisees and Zealots and other groups like that, believed that there's no more prophets, that prophecy is done, but the Essenes believed that it was continuing on, that should guide our attention there to investigate what these people were talking about. And of course you have different things, like the community rule. While it's an earlier document, it doesn't seem to be the very earliest. Reading it seems like it came after things like the Thanksgiving hymns, which may have been written by the teacher of righteousness. That there's a figure, this is something everyone here needs to become acquainted with. There's a figure in Second Temple Judaism simply known as the teacher of righteousness. He doesn't have a name that people know other than that, really. Other than he's called the instructor or the master, different names like that, but those are more just descriptive terms. But he was known as the teacher of righteousness, and he's basically viewed as the one who founded the Essenes or the Qumran community. And it actually talks about him in the beginning of the community rule, talks about the teacher of righteousness, or maybe I'm thinking of the Damascus document. I'd have to go and check again. Two documents that are very important for understanding Qumran and the Essenes and so on are the community rule and the Damascus document. I'd have to go back and check to find the specific place that I'm thinking of. But these
I
are
think
all
it was
things,
in the community rule where it talks about the teacher of righteousness, actually.
Okay, it might be in both, because I just went to the front of the Damascus. Yeah, the Damascus document talks about the whole thing of, a time of wrath, an age of wrath for 390 years from when Israel was given into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, and then wandering in the wilderness for 20 years, and then the teacher of righteousness being raised up, which is a really interesting point in time, because that brings you to the first part of the 2nd century. So it's 2nd century BC. So that's 180 to 160, something like that, which is also dealing at that time. You have the Maccabees and different things. So all of this is a really important part of history. This is something that we really need to get a grasp of, because we need to understand that the Judaism into which Christ was birthed, so to speak, was very different from the Judaism in the days of David and Solomon. Things had changed a lot, even very different from the days of Zechariah and Haggai. That was all during the Persian period. But then you have the Greek Empire taking over, which radically changed everything. And all of that, you have the Maccabean revolt, and then even after the Greeks, then you have the Roman period starting before the time of Christ. So this is all these things play a big part in having the quote-unquote Old Testament end at the very beginning of the Second Temple period, and then picking up the New Testament and reading it. There's a lot of necessary information that you just don't have to really understand what was going on in the days of Christ. So thank you, Norman, for reading those passages from the community rule. These are all things for people to investigate. So the two things that we've been talking about so far in this meeting, we have something from shortly before the time of Christ, the community rule, and then something from shortly after the time of Christ, the Epistle of Barnabas. And there's a focus on purity in both instances. And one thing that I wanted to mention with the Epistle of Barnabas, whatever the case may be as to if it's true and if it was really written by Barnabas and if it is a product of inspiration or not, whatever the case may be, one thing that we learn from the Epistle of Barnabas is that at very early stages in whether you call it Christianity or just post-Jesus religion, you have the thought there from a very early stage of things that the purity laws were to be understood antitypically, were to be understood symbolically. That's something that I think is really important. And you can see a lot of the things in the Epistle of Barnabas that may cause people to stumble the most are actually the sorts of things that you find in Paul. So like in the Epistle of Barnabas, when he talks about the clean and unclean foods, he says, so Moses commanded this. And then he's like, what does this mean? Well, it means this. And then he offers a symbolic interpretation. Well, with Paul, you see similar things. Like where in Corinthians, Paul says, Moses says about, what was it with the oxen? Not to muzzle the ox. He says not to muzzle the ox. And then he says, what does this mean? What is he talking about? Does God care for oxen? No, he's speaking about the ministers of the gospel. That's the way Paul reasons it and even states it. he asks, does God care for oxen? And then he basically just says no, and then says it means this, and he applies it to the early missionaries of the gospel. Now, obviously, Paul, he's a devout Jew. You read everything he says about the law. He's not saying that, okay, we can all go and mistreat oxen now. No, he's just saying that there's a higher meaning to it, and that it's about time we understand the higher meaning. So that's the same sort of thing you find in the Epistle of Barnabas. The community rule and the other things in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in some regards, lean toward that sort of thing, where you see understanding things in not just the external sense, but understanding symbolic meanings of things, like a garment woven with diverse fibers. There's places in the Dead Sea Scrolls that explain that in a more symbolic sense. And I'll just say, the Dead Sea Scrolls also have a lot of psalms in them, more psalms than most people have in their Bibles. And the psalms have that sort of thing where they are talking about the ceremonial law in symbolic ways, connecting the idea of burning incense with prayer and a contrite spirit with sacrifice and all these different sorts of things. So what we want to find out is if there is a line of truth in all these things that we're investigating. And we want to find out, were the Essenes part of the line of truth? Because we can trace a line of truth up to a point throughout the Old Testament, and then we have this period where it's like, well, what happened there? Where did the truth go? Was there a line of truth through that period at all, leading up to the time of John the Baptist? Did John the Baptist just kind of spring up out of nowhere, and there was no line of truth prior to him ever since the days of Malachi? Is that really how it happened? Or was there actually more there in between? And if there was, who was it? That's something to all take into account and investigate. And of course, every quote-unquote New Testament document, whether it's in most Christian canons or not, we need to investigate it and see if it's part of the line of truth. Does anyone else have thoughts or comments or questions?
Hi, this is John.
Hey, John.
Joy and I were reading today the third Silver Trumpet, and it was talking about, the fourth Silver Trumpet. It was talking about the priestly garments, about the white linen and how pure it had to be, and then the sash with the colors, and so it was kind of funny. I mean, we did not read Barnabas, but we ended up reading the Silver Trumpet, so just kind of blitzing through from the beginning all the way to the most current one. So that was pretty interesting.
Awesome.
Good. Oh, yeah, no, see, that stuff, all of that relates so much to the things that we're studying. I'm glad that you guys are going back to read those Silver Trumpets. The Silver Trumpet, I really have a burden to emphasize to people, or to really strongly encourage people to read them. So I'm so glad you guys are.
You guys may already know about this, but just in case you don't, there's also weekly studies being held now.
On Wednesdays.
On Wednesday nights, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, going through, starting with Volume 1, and they've had 4 studies so far, but they're still in Volume 1, and it's going to be going through the Silver Trumpets with a fine-tooth comb. So, if you want to join in on those, to learn and participate in that sort of thing, that would definitely, I'm sure, be a benefit to everybody.
Yeah, that sounds good. We knew about the studies with Carol and the gang, so cool. We were like, we made one of them. We've made 1 or 2 of them, right?
Oh, good.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that I wanted to mention about those issues of the Silver Trumpet is that there's certain things that were revealed last year when those Silver Trumpets were being written that are such keys to understanding a lot more in the antitypical observance of the sacrificial law. It's really, really important stuff. And so as we're going and we're reading certain things, we've had certain aspects revealed to us already, and it's just applying it where it likewise applies in other aspects, other different sacrifices and aspects of sacrifice. All right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that since the Silver Trumpets were brought up, I had an issue that was interesting to me that I wanted to mention.
Sure.
Okay. Well, this is from the Silver Trumpet, Volume 1, Number 3, and it's talking about the purification of the priesthood and the rites and rituals involved in that. And, the two sacrifices that were done, the sin offering and the burnt offering, were explained in detail. But one is left out, and that is the last offering, which, sometimes is called the offering for ordination, or, the sacrifice for ordination. There's some other words used. But anyway, I know that you also called it a peace offering.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, something that jumped out at me is that in Leviticus 7:20, it says the person who eats meat from the peace offering sacrifice, which belongs to the Lord, while his uncleanness persists, will be cut off from his people.
You got a little more quiet all of a sudden. Could you repeat that last part?
Yeah, that the person who is unclean and eats meat from the peace offering sacrifice will be cut off.
Mm.
And so I was reading about that offering, and one of the things that happened is that the second ram is presented for ordination. This is in chapter 8:22, and then it tells that Aaron and his sons laid their hands on the head of the ram, and he slaughtered it, and then took some of its blood, put it on Aaron's right earlobe, etc. But then it says that after doing these various things with the fat and the blood and different things, then from the basket of unleavened bread that was before the Lord, he took an unleavened loaf, one loaf of bread mixed with olive oil, etc., and put that on the fat parts and on the right thigh. Okay, so after doing these things, wave offering, then that was offered up in smoke on the altar. Okay, well, what I'm getting to is that after that, they actually stayed in the temple for 7 days. I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
And that they were told then, after all of those things, then Moses said to Aaron and his sons, boil the meat at the entrance of the meeting tent, and dare you to eat it, and the bread which is in the ordination offering basket just as I have commanded. So, anyway, I was just wondering if, it just seems like there's a connection there between our sister revealing to us the issues involving ritual and atypical cleanness, and knowing that there's something that we need to have before we can have that third offering done for us. Just wondering if you thought there was a connection there.
First, I want to just ask if everyone got and understood what you just said, too. I understood what you said there very well, and I'm glad that you said it. Was anyone else? Were you all able to follow what Carol was saying?
No, I did not understand it. Can you try it again?
Okay.
Sure. Do you want to?
Which did you want to, or?
Either way. I mean, if you want to say it again, that's totally fine. Or if you want me to kind of recap.
Okay. Well, I noticed. I'll try to say it real briefly. Leviticus 7:20 says that anyone who eats of the meat of a peace offering sacrifice in an unclean condition will be cut off. And then over in Leviticus 8, it tells about the three offerings, the three sacrifices for the priesthood and their ordination. And we were told in the number 3 of the Silver Trumpet about that, and we were told in detail about, or a fair amount of detail, about the first 2 sacrifices, the one for sin and then the burnt offering. But we were told that we needed to put those into practice into our lives, understand them, and then also put them into practice before anything about the third offering, which is called an ordination offering or a peace offering. And so since that requires, after the animal is killed and certain things are done with the bread and the blood and, all these different things, then the priests are required to stay in the temple, and this is the last sacrifice for them in their ordination, and they're required to eat that meat of the peace offering. So I was just wondering if that couldn't be why our sister is revealing to us, how to become anatypically ritually clean, because it's important for us to know so that we can do what we need to do in order to have that third offering done for us in antitype. Was that more clear?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so the reason why I just wanted to ask if people got that is just because I think it's a very significant point, and I agree 100%, Carol. Like, what you're seeing there, in other words, is an absolutely valid connection. So I'll just mention real briefly, especially for those of you who were not reading the Silver Trumpets ever since the beginning when they came out, and perhaps for those who weren't on the studies when we originally went through them. Our Heavenly Family was showing us primarily the idea of being called into priesthood. This is last year during the Feast of Tabernacles, actually, showing us the idea of being called into priesthood and what the ordination of the priesthood actually means in antitype. So we have it in Exodus 29 and Leviticus chapter 8. Exodus 29 gives a prescription for what is to be done for the priesthood to be ordained. And Leviticus 8 is a description of that same thing as it happened. And we studied those passages, and our Heavenly Family revealed to us the first 2 sacrifices. The first sacrifice was a purification offering from sin, and the second was a burnt offering. And there's another one which it's an ordination offering, which is a type of peace offering. And what Carol is pointing out here, I think, is so significant because, yeah, we're told, you said it's Leviticus chapter 7, verse 20, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, we're told that if someone unclean partakes of a peace offering, they'll be cut off. So we've been waiting a year, and I hope people haven't been waiting, but I'll say we've been waiting a year, and there's been no revelation of that peace offering. And we've been told why. We've been told that our Heavenly Family, it won't benefit us at all for our Heavenly Family to just reveal to us what the peace offering means if we don't actually take to heart what they have already revealed. If we don't take seriously and actually experience what is symbolized by the purification offering and the burnt offering. And now, what Carol just brought out shows us that it's not only that they won't reveal it to us because it won't do us any good, but because if we were to partake of the antitype of the peace offering without being purified first from antitypical ritual impurity, then we would be cut off from among God's people.
Pretty serious.
Really, really serious.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry about that. I don't mean to interrupt. So the gist of being purified, I think, is what we're missing. So I get it. Purification's a big cornerstone piece to this entire process.
Yes.
So the significance of purification, not paraphrased, in a quick summary is?
Okay, so in a quick summary, what we learned on the last new moon is that impurity, antitypically, roughly equates to things that deal with non-truth. So to be pure, ritually, is to be basically cleansed from error and non-truth, and to be having truth restored to you, at least on an intellectual level. And I'll distinguish, just to make that a little more clear, that isn't the same thing as being purified from sin. Just like in the type, someone could be ritually impure or ritually pure, and that had nothing to do with their moral standing or if they were sinful or not. And so it's just if someone is in contact with error or not. So if we're in contact with error, we're basically ritually impure antitypically. That error, what it does is it puts us in a place, while we're still in contact with it, we're in a place of temptation, we're in contact with quote-unquote unclean spirits, fallen angels, and are under their influence to whatever regard. And that is holding us back from offering a true sacrifice, giving ourselves as a living sacrifice and being justified by faith. So just like it was in the type, you had to become pure in order to sacrifice. Just so in the antitype, you have to become pure. In other words, you have to be separated from those errors to be in a mental environment of truth, at least theoretically, so that you can actually offer yourself up and be justified by faith.
So really all the purification of touching the animal, touching death, touching blood, yada, 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 is basically, that's almost like type and anti-type of what you just said mechanically.
Yeah. Yes. So that's, like, this is what we're getting, and our Heavenly Family is just now explaining these things to us. So there's a lot still to understand. But, things like the Epistle of Barnabas, for instance, if that's true, then that gives a lot of very specific things of like, okay, well, if you come in contact with this certain behavior or a person doing this or whatever, then you come in contact with that specific unclean animal in antitype. And therefore, what you must do is basically parallel to what someone had to do to be cleansed from touching that unclean animal.
Would you say that is like also parallel with one of the 70 wicked gods, almost like saying this is the remedy from this one, this is the remedy from that one, that's the remedy from that one, to some degree?
I wouldn't necessarily equate that with the animals per se, but there may be things like that connected with the ritual law. And the reason why I say that is because, when we read the Old Testament, it doesn't talk about unclean spirits and demons and fallen angels all that much in the regular Old Testament. But you get to the New Testament, and it's talking about demons and fallen angels all the time. And for the vast majority of the time, it calls them unclean spirits. And so it's connecting that idea of uncleanness with these fallen beings. So there's something there to, like what you're saying. I don't know exactly where it comes in, how it all fits together and all that, but there's something there that we all need to study into more.
Just on a real basic note having to do with cleansing, I just looked up some scripture references that I thought might be helpful. And just connecting washing to the Word, Ephesians 5:26, speaking of the church in Christ, of course, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the Word. Genesis 35:2, then Jacob said unto his household, unto all that were with him, put away the strange gods that are among you, and be clean, and change your garments. Job 11:4, for thou hast said, my doctrine is pure, and I am clean in thine eyes. Matthew 8:3, and Jesus put forth his hand, which we know is a message, and touched him, saying, I will, be thou clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. John 15:3, now ye are clean through the word which I've spoken unto you. Well, that's very clear. 2 Peter 2:18, for when they speak great swelling words of vanity, they allure through the lust of the flesh, through much wantonness. Those that were clean escape from them who live in error. And then just connecting righteousness to cleanness, just a couple more. Revelation 19:8, and to her was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white, for the fine linen is the righteousness of the saints. So that's associating the white, the linen, and cleanliness, of course. And then Revelation 19:14, and the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean. And then my favorite, Ezekiel 36:25, then I will sprinkle clean water upon you, and ye shall be clean from all your filthiness and from all your idols. I cleanse you. That's just a few things there.
Okay, that's good. I just want to quickly comment on the last one that you read and the one from, where was it, Genesis 35, verse 4 or verse 6?
Verse 2.
Verse 2, okay, thank you. Genesis 35, verse 2, where it talks about Jacob and telling people to put away the gods from them, the wicked gods, and to change their clothes, and it's equating that with purification. So you see, it's like, okay, so one is purifying from your idols by sprinkling clean water in Ezekiel 36, and then in Genesis 35, you have that idea of purifying, and it's separating from these gods, which it was the idols, because they believed that the gods inhabited the idols. But both of those instances have that idea. And then the one that you read from Peter somewhere, connecting it with error, that was a clear reference as well. Maybe you could email those out to everyone.
Sure, I'd be glad to. On the top of that page is just a little, I started out looking into the articles of furniture in the court, and the labor was really interesting to me. So I have this on here, so I'll just explain that of course, the laity need to be, clean so that they can go and, sacrifice. But the priesthood, of course, need to be clean, and they have to, wash in the laver before they can take any of the blood into the tent of meeting. So anyway, the laver was a bronze basin stood on a base between the altar and the tabernacle or tent of meeting, Exodus 30:18. It was a large brass bowl filled with water. The brass was taken from mirrors of the women. The word laver means wash basin. The English derivative of this word is lavatory, which carries the meaning of place of washing. The priests were obliged to wash their hands and their feet before entering God's presence. To disobey that would mean death. So that's a little bonus, and I'll be glad to send that out.
Absolutely. One thing I would like to do as well, I want to contact the people who publish a book called Old Testament Pseudepigrapha, More Non-Canonical Scriptures, and see if it's all right for me, because I know some of these things are copyrighted and so on. But I would like to send you guys all hopefully a selection from a document called Aramaic Levi, because that one is a harder to come by text, and even if you can come by it, it might be expensive and everything to get it. But Aramaic Levi was a very old document that was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I think it even goes to 300 BC for the document itself, which obviously means it was copied from something earlier than that. And it basically has Levi describing how he was taken in vision and told that he would be made a priest and brought into the priesthood, and that the priesthood would be in his line, and he was taught the laws of the priesthood by Isaac. And it connects with another book called the Book of Jubilees. The Book of Jubilees talks about how, the priestly law had been there from the beginning, from the gates of Eden, and how God's people understood the priestly law and taught it to their children, and they wrote it down in books and all these different things. And so much was lost after the experience of Babylon and everything. And then finally, when Abraham was called to separate from idolatry, he had a lot of these things restored back to him. And so he had things like the books of Enoch, the book of Noah, and different things like that. And he understood the priestly law. He was taught how to do it. And then he taught it to his children, and they taught it to theirs, and so on. And the way it describes things in Jubilees as far as the priestly law is totally in harmony with what is found in Aramaic Levi, even with such details as what wood can be offered on the altar. There's 12 types of wood, and there's certain things that distinguish those types of wood from other wood. And so Aramaic Levi is basically a first-person narrative of Levi explaining how Isaac showed him the priestly law. And in it, he talks about the washings and how at the beginning, when you first go to do the priest activity, you have to wash your whole body and put on your priestly clothes. And then before you approach the altar, you have to wash your hands and your feet. And then you go and you get the wood, bring it to the altar, you split the wood, you examine it for worms or anything like that, and put the wood on the altar, and then you have to wash again. And then there's different aspects of, there's, I think 4 or 5 different times that he was told he had to wash his hands and his feet in connection with sacrificing. And, it tells things so specifically, the measurement of how much wood for what type of animal, and how much flour, how much salt, how much oil, how much wine for the libation. Because some of these things aren't explained in Leviticus. So it tells you those things. It tells you the order that things were to be done. Okay, when the priest is to arrange the cut-up parts of the animal on the altar, which part is put on first and which is put on second, and all of that is described in such detail in Aramaic Levi. And if we're studying the priestly law, I really think that's something that at least I'll read on here for you guys again. I know I've read a part of it before, but something to take into consideration. And when we do that, we can kind of develop a coherent understanding of what was actually done by the priests for each sacrifice, and get a grip of the different washings and all of those different aspects. Okay, I was just looking at the time here, and we've been on for about an hour and a half now. Has haven't read Leviticus yet, but that's all right because there's so much. This. I just want to say that I am very, very happy with this meeting. I'm so glad that you all were studying today, and have things to contribute, and very good contributions at that. I mean, this is all stuff that we need to understand, and doubtless our Heavenly Family will show us these things the more we're seeking. And, I mean, that's what we're told. We read in Proverbs, and it talks about seeking with our whole heart and so on, and that if we do these things, we will know, or we will understand the fear of the Lord, and we'll gain the knowledge of Elohim. That's what we're told. That's a promise. And so I want to encourage everyone here, keep going. Dive into this stuff more and more. Keep studying, interact with each other, discuss these things, even when we're not on the meeting. And, of course, when we're on the meetings, yeah, absolutely, this is great. I'm glad that you guys, read the different things that you read and mentioned the things that you did. I just have such confidence that if we keep going in this direction, that we will understand. Our Heavenly Family will show us exactly what it means to be priests of righteousness, and that we will be purified from all of our impurities, and that anything that is holding anyone back from laying themselves on the altar and being a true sacrifice and receiving justification by faith, that every obstacle will be taken out of the way. Again, the obstacles, remember, uncleanness, nothing is unclean of itself. It's something in the mind. This is the same thing that we've learned. We've all been taught through this message that the only thing that stands between a sinner and the righteousness of God is a lie, and a lie is nothing. But still, if you regard it as something, then it prevents you, right? That's the same idea as nothing is unclean of itself. Still, he who regards it as unclean, it is unclean to him. So this is all, it's going to show us everything that prevents us from going to our Heavenly Family and receiving the righteousness of God. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? Mm-hmm. This is the establishment of the kingdom, the bringing about of the priesthood of righteousness, so that sin finally can be done away with. Another point to keep in mind that we've talked about before is that we're in the investigative judgment for the living. One of the most profound realizations that we can draw from that is the fact that, hey, the record of sins for the dead is already gone through and dealt with. So the only sins left on the record in the heavenly sanctuary that need to be dealt with are the sins of those living. So it's like, okay, people, if we continue to perpetuate sin, we'll continue to perpetuate the need of Christ's intercession in the heavenly sanctuary and delay the second coming. But if we receive the purification from impurity and from sin, this whole thing can be wrapped up very quickly. Mm. Thank you, Heavenly Family, for that.
Yes. I think it's really interesting that our sister is using our obedience to study into purification to actually purify us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Did somebody else have something to say?
Amen.
Amen. I second that. All right. Well, would somebody like to volunteer to close us off with prayer? We've had such a lively meeting, and now everyone's all quiet.
I know.
Would someone like to just volunteer?
I will.
All right.
I'll do it.
Unless I... Okay, great. And Mary's going to do it.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Heavenly Family, we thank you for the Day of Atonement. We thank you for today, the Sabbath day. We look forward to the Feast of Tabernacles coming up. And we just praise you for the things that you're teaching us. We thank you so much for Trent and Teresa and for each branch candidate among us on this phone call and the ones that even aren't on this call. Lord God, I pray that you would bless us and take care of us and open up our minds to the truth. And we ask all this in the name of the branch, he and she. Amen.
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 Beautiful.